So in lesson 6.1 here, we're going to do a very detailed overview of sanitation and hygiene. So this is a good lesson in which you want to have a coffee, you want to have a nice comfortable place to sit. We're going to cover a lot of material in this section, so you might want to take some notes here because it's the kind of section you're likely to have some follow-up questions on. But there is some supplementary reading materials that come with it, so hopefully that helps answer a lot of your questions and you find this at least somewhat interesting as we move along. So I'm really of the belief that a good sanitation and hygiene program is crucial for business success. So when I started producing microgreens commercially in 2009, I actually did it as a directed studies project at the University of British Columbia. And the goal of the project then was to develop a small-scale urban microgreens production system that was in line with Canadian Food Inspection Agency guidelines for sprouting. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that was to find a good urban production system that could generate enough revenue to make a living, or close to, but also to take those guidelines, which are always written with like a big facility and big sales in mind, and apply them to a smaller scale operation and try to do most of what's in there. And I feel I did a pretty good job, but it's something that will always evolve. So this is sort of where this focus on sanitation and hygiene came from. And then as I continued to develop the business, I saw more and more how important it was, not just for the potential pathogens for human health, but in terms of avoiding any crop diseases. And I've definitely noticed over the years when sanitation and hygiene and cleaning falls off a little bit in production, we definitely see a rise in disease. So the connection is very obvious, and so I'm very careful about that. So sprouts, as I mentioned before, and microgreens here in Canada are really considered the same thing and are considered a high-risk product for human pathogens. So really what we're trying to do is a number of things here by having a good hygiene program. One is reducing the likelihood of crop disease, like I said. Two is reducing the likelihood of human pathogens, which is really important from just a health and liability point of view. And we also really want to maintain our product integrity. And it's by having these programs in place that you can do that. My general rule of thumb is to treat your operation like a commercial kitchen or like a dentist's office. Like things need to be clean and organized and well cared for and well maintained all the time. There's no room for slipping up. And this shouldn't be intimidating. What it means is just having very set processes to follow and easy processes. You don't want to make things complex. You want to make things fluid and intuitive. And this way, not only are you maintaining product integrity, but you're making your production actually much more efficient as well. So keep that in mind as we move along. So there's four sort of things I think sanitation and hygiene covers at a basic level. So one is the systematic cleaning and sanitation based on equipment use. So what I mean here is like every time we use something, when we're done with it, we need to wash it and sanitize it and make it ready for next use. So this is like after a harvest, after packing something or unpacking something. Once that equipment is done with, it needs to be cleaned, sanitized, and ready for next use. You also want a system for dealing with contamination. You know, for example, what's your protocol if you're harvesting and you drop the harvest knife on the floor? You can't just pick it up and start harvesting again. You have to have a set process for dealing with that. And it might seem ridiculous to have a set process for a whole bunch of things, but these are actually the intuitive things you should be doing anyways. So it can seem a bit intimidating at first and a lot of documentation to write, but it pays off. The next thing is periodic cleaning and sanitation. So things like fridges and coolers, behind shelves, there's areas that can really get neglected in a production facility, just like they do in your house. You know, that space under your kitchen sink, maybe a corner of the bathroom or something. So in a production system, this is a place where pathogens can sort of breed and be housed, and so we want to avoid that risk. The third thing is equipment maintenance and calibration. So if we're using things as part of our toolkit of sanitation and hygiene, we need to make sure that stuff is working properly. So for example, we need to know that our fridges are showing the right temperature, our thermometers and our coolers are calibrated and working well. Even that our scale is working well, so when we're measuring something, it's accurate. So this is just something we can do as part of routine maintenance in order to keep up our equipment and extend its life by taking good care of it, and that's going to reduce our costs over time. And then fourth is we need to have very good record keeping and documentation of these activities. And this does two things. It demonstrates competence. It shows to others that we know what we're doing, and it proves that these tasks have been done. If we say, oh, we do this and we do that, we do this this sanitation process at this point, and we do this at this point, we want to have some documentation to prove that. And the real public analogy there is, if you go into a public washroom, a lot of the time you see a chart up on the back of the door that says like who came, when a check on the bathroom was done, who did it, and then it's signed. And so what you're doing is keeping a record of these things. And at this level, there's a lot of things to keep records of. And we'll go into really easy methods to do that so you don't get overwhelmed with that as well. So yeah, let's take a look and see what this looks like and start moving into some of these, the principles I've talked about. And I think we're going to cover about 11 points here. And we're going to move back into some photos here, so it won't just be a text in my voice in this section. So number one, you need washing areas. You need a designated washing and sanitizing station to clean your equipment. We talked about our outdoor wash area previously, and we'll look at that. And then for your harvest facility, you basically need a 2 or 3 sink washing and sanitizing station and a place to store and dry your equipment. So this is very similar to something you would have in a commercial kitchen. Kitchens often have a washing machine, like a commercial washing machine, and if you can afford that or if that fits in your space, that's great. They can be quite expensive, but they're a very good option for keeping things very clean and sanitary. The 2 or 3 sink system is a good alternative to that. And then we need space to store our equipment and allow it to dry when we're done with it. So here's our outdoor space like I talked about before. There's a bin for soaking, there's a place to scrub trays and spray them down, there's a bin for sanitizing, and there's a drying area. So this is somewhere where we use outdoors, and mainly this is for trays, but other sort of equipment more in the production side of things. Inside is where we're going to be dealing with things like our harvest knives and screens and bins that we've been harvesting with. And the original system at the food peddlers actually only had a single sink, which made the process quite tedious because we had a lot of steps to go through to do a wash and then a rinse and a sanitize and all that. So that was quite difficult. So the 2 or 3 sink station actually is not only a best practice, but it's also much more efficient. You can see we have this area set up here with a lot of the components that you need. We've got a sink with hot and cold water. We've got soap, paper towels, and a hot water heater. Our sanitizer spray bottles are there as well. Now we're working in a very, very tight space in this case, so it definitely has some limitations. Ideally, this is a 2 sink system, and you have a separate hand washing sink. And this is something that most local health authorities are looking for, is your 2 sink system for washing and sanitizing and a separate hand washing sink. Unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of that right now. And then once stuff is washed and sanitized, you need a space for it to be able to dry. And you need a space where it's not going to get contaminated after you've done all this work. So here you can see we've got things set up where we can set stuff off to the side, and then basically once it's dried, it's essentially ready for next use. So I mentioned this earlier. You need to wash and sanitize your equipment after each use. You can't wait till the next day or a few days down the road and do it before you need it the next time, because if there is a pathogen there, it's gonna build. And so one of our approaches to avoiding any pathogen issues is to eliminate anything that might be there as quickly as possible. So our process, especially with our harvest equipment, is as soon as we're done harvest, everything gets washed and sanitized right away. And we're leaving our equipment to be ready for the next use. So when we set up for a harvest, we've got a very set setup, like you can see here, and everything has to be ready to go. We don't want to start our harvest by cleaning a bunch of equipment. This should be washed, sanitized, dried, and ready to go. So literally, we can set this up in about 3 minutes and start cutting right away. That's really, really important. And the longer something sits, the higher the risk of a pathogen, if it is present, getting a chance to grow and spread. I alluded to this in the previous section. You need to store your equipment so it can't be contaminated once you have washed and sanitized it. So the harvest setup I showed you before, what we do is we put everything upside down, and we put some of our loose equipment, you can see it there just underneath. And then basically we don't use this space. This space only gets used for harvesting. And so we know that once this stuff is out and it's covered, there's very, very little risk of it being contaminated at all. In the earlier sections when we talked about the different areas of production, I showed you this slide as well. And here is our seed soaking and sanitizing and rinsing tools. And once they're washed and sanitized, we keep them up above and out of the way of everything else. So there's very, very little risk of any contamination happening there. So we know when we go to use it the next time, it's going to be clean and ready to go. I'm a big fan of gloves. One of the reasons for gloves with microgreens is because you're handling sort of small little stems, often in water, and like you can see here, it often happens that the stems can kind of get caught under your fingernail. And so it's nice to have the gloves just to avoid that, and for a bit of consistency. If you have cuts on your hand or even scrapes or anything, that might be very subtle. They're just well protected with the gloves on there. You can still wash your hands when you have the gloves on, but you might find in a harvest that you're going through a few pairs of gloves because they might get contaminated in some way, or they might tear or something like that. So I do recommend good quality gloves because it will make a big difference. A few other things like clothing wise, tie back your hair, wear clean clothing, because we're often doing, a sowing and other activities that involve soil. You don't want to be bringing that soil back into here. Even though we're working with soil here, we don't want soil in our wash process. We're trying to separate the microgreen from the soil at this point. So you don't want your apron to be contaminating things, for example. It's also really crucial that when you move from one process to another, that you're washing your hands. So if you go from harvesting to packing or to seeding or something else, between each of those processes, it's important to wash your hands so you're not moving stuff from area to area. As a reminder, above our sink, we have a little hand washing diagram there, and I believe there's an attachment of something similar in the documents section here as well. So it's just good to have some reminders of that stuff, and hands are another great way to contaminate things. An example I give about the importance of hand washing is people use their phones a lot, and phones have been shown to have a lot of fecal coliforms on them, to be very, very unsanitary. And so it would be very easy to sort of pull out your phone, send a tweet or a text or something, put it in your pocket, and then go back to harvesting. You can't do that. Anything you do away from the process that you are working on requires you to wash your hands. Over time, you'll get used to sort of walking with your hands out in front of you in this very odd way that you see doctors on TV doing. And it's just your awareness of that and the importance of that will improve over time greatly. Your shelving and your work surfaces need to stay clean as well. So if you're sanitizing all these trays and all this equipment, the shelving that you're putting that stuff on also needs to be clean. Our production system is such that once a week, the shelves all get cleared off. And this is just right before we go into uncovering some germinating trays. These all get wiped down, and then they get sprayed with a sanitizer. So at this point here, these shelves are several years old, but they're still in very, very good shape. And there's no debris building up on them because they're cleaned so often. Twice a year, we actually scrub these down really, really hard to make sure we're getting anything that might have built up. So what it's doing is it's really making sure that these stay really clean all the time. And actually, it's actually, maintaining their value. They're going to be in much better shape. So we also do this with our work areas as well, just making sure everything stays really clean. And I really like this picture because you can see how organized things are. Everything has a very specific spot, and everything is clean and ready to go. So in terms of periodic cleaning, like things like fridges and coolers as well, like I mentioned, like little sort of hidden bits here and there, that's really important. So this is something to think about. Like, take a look at what you're doing now if you're doing any farming or growing, and see if you can find any gaps to see how you can improve that. And when you implement your microgreen system, that way you're off to a much better start in making sure this is top of mind. I can't stress enough how important this is, and I know from experience that I can tell when things are not being done as well, because we do see more disease, and you just get a feeling when you're working in a space multiple times a week and sanitation is a focus, you start to notice things. So having routine maintenance makes all this stuff much, much easier and very, very efficient. Don't forget about the floors. So with every harvest and several times a week in the greenhouse, we're doing sweeping and mopping of floors. So this is making sure that all the debris is being picked up. And we actually use a wet dry vac in the greenhouse to after watering and after washing and sanitizing the floors in order to get any of the extra moisture off the ground. And what that does is actually reduces humidity within our growing space. So it actually makes our growing conditions much better as well. Another thing is that floor drains and corners and places like that are another good place for pathogens to breed. I know if you were to do a swab test in those areas is where often contaminants are found. So things tend to work their way down because of gravity. So it's really, really important to make sure we're keeping our floor very clean. And then when we clean, just being really careful about not sort of flipping the broom around as we sweep. So we're sort of flicking stuff up into the air, being careful with our hose as we vacuum and not hitting the sprouts, things like that. These are important. You'll notice here on the right that the lowest shelf there is still quite high off the ground. It's a couple feet off the ground, and that's a way of keeping it separate from the floor so there are no issues with potential splashing there. So I mentioned this already. You want to do regular washing and sanitizing of other equipment. Like I said, coolers, fridges, things like that. Yeah, we wash our coolers every week or two as opposed to like every harvest. Once again, it keeps them sanitary. It keeps them looking better when you're doing deliveries. And it actually just maintains their quality. Some of our coolers have lasted a really long time. And I think that constant cleaning and sanitizing goes a really long way towards helping with that. Excuse me. So pest and rodent control. Rodents can do damage really, really quickly, and they can also be a potential way to spread pathogens. And in general, rodents and food production facilities don't go very well together. I could show you many pictures of rodent damage over the years. Here's one in one of the growing benches where a mouse had got in and basically tunneled through, and I don't know what they were doing, but they were having a field day. So like these are waste trays, and even the surrounding trays are waste. If we know a mouse has been in there, we can't tell what tray it's been on or hasn't. So all these trays end up getting discarded. So there's a real cost there. And so when we look at pest and rodent control, it really is two steps, and it starts with prevention. If you can enclose your space to make sure they don't get in, that's definitely going to be your best option. You don't want to be trying to deal with them once they're in. Once rodents know they can get into a space and there's a food source in there, or in the winter it's a warm place and a safe place for them to be, they're going to try really, really hard to continue to get in there. So work really, really hard to keep them out in the first place. Even with the prevention, you do need to have a trapping program in place. There are some good traps out there that are effective and some that are very good, effective catch and release. So if you're concerned about killing rodents, despite their potential damage to your crop, there are some options out there. So this is important. This is something that health inspectors will definitely look for because rodent problems around food are very well documented. And especially in a city like Vancouver or any other coastal city where there tends to be a higher than usual prevalence of rodents, that's something that's really going to be on the radar. So one of the things we didn't do in the beginning and now is quite routine is doing regular product testing. So what I mean here is we are sending our product into the lab on a regular basis to test it for any human pathogens. So we're doing a couple things here. One of them is we're once again, we're demonstrating our competence to keep our space clean. We're washing, we're sanitizing things, we've got good protocols and good workflows to avoid cross-contamination, and so we would expect our product to be clean. And even if at some point in the process a pathogen is introduced, we still have mechanisms in place to reduce its likelihood of spreading. So we do at the moment a monthly test. We harvest a portion of our product, often from several different crops while they're still growing. We send them to the lab and we test for three things. We test for E. coli, we test for Listeria monocytogenes or L. mono, and Salmonella. These are three common human pathogens that show up in sprouts and other food. And really, the L. mono has been shown to show up a lot more in microgreen system in the Canada and in the US over the past few years, and it's likely that it's coming in the soil. So even though we're separating in the US sprouts from microgreens in terms of product differentiation, microgreens still have a risk because you are bringing in soil from off-site often, and there's a chance of bringing in a contaminant in that way. We're also doing regular testing of the water. We do that a couple times a year. That's particularly important if you're on a well system, but even if you're on municipal water, it's important to do that regular testing. This is another thing that inspectors will look for. They want to know that you have been testing, and what you're doing is you're demonstrating the effectiveness of your sanitation program. And so it's really important to keep on top of that. It's another expense, of course, but it's also some peace of mind. Now, related to that, you do need to have a recall protocol. This means if you do a test and you find that you've got a serious pathogen issue, or something happens like, oh my God, it looks like there was broken glass here and it's got into the system, you need to be able to get your product off the shelf really, really quickly. So I mentioned previous issues with Listeria mono. In the past year and a half, there's been about 5 recalls in Canada related to microgreens and Listeria mono. And so what happens in these cases is the companies need to do a recall. They either need to go and remove their own product from the shelf or have their customers remove it themselves. In the case of Greenbelt here, this company went out of business. This recall cost them so much that they literally couldn't recover from it. So it's something you really, really want to avoid. The CFIA, if they do an inspection, will ask you to have a recall protocol in place, and will actually, I believe, ask you to do a mock recall. So you need to know that you can get your stuff off the shelves as quickly as you can. So the food peddlers have never had to do a recall, thank goodness. But we actually did pull product from the shelf once because we had dated something wrong. And we called and emailed and got everything off the shelf in about an hour. It was very quick. And it's kind of one of the advantages of being small scale, is you have much more connection to your customer. We do the deliveries directly, and so we can respond to things very quickly as well. So that's a real advantage there for sure. So one of the things I've kind of covered here in a way is that you want to take a multi-step approach to hygiene. So you want to have good processes in place to avoid contamination, and then you want to have processes to deal with contamination when it happens, or in a way you're kind of assuming it's there, and so we're doing regular cleaning and sanitizing to make sure that things don't spread if they are present. So I want to give a bit of an example here how we take this approach with seed. And when we look at taking something from seed to crop. So our first step in seed hygiene is actually getting our seed from a supplier that does pathogen testing on the seed before they even accept a lot of seeds. So we deal with mums sprouting seeds in Saskatchewan here in Canada. We send a lot of people their way because they do a very good processes for maintaining seed integrity. And if they test a lot and it comes back positive for a pathogen, they reject it, which means if I'm getting seed from them, it has already passed their own screening process. So that's number one. It's a very preventative approach before you even have the seed in hand. The next thing is storing your seed to avoid contamination. So this picture here is a lot of about 750 kilograms of seed we got in a order, and I remember this, and remember sort of uncovering it and getting it ready to pack into our vehicle there, and thinking, like, this is exposed. A bird could come by and poo on these bags. It could start raining. Like, there's so many things, and so you do become very aware of these things as you continue to work with your products. So before we sow, we rinse and sanitize our seeds. And so even though they're coming to us quote unquote pathogen free, we are still doing a sanitizing step in order to be precautionary. And we also document that, when it happened, how much seed we have sanitized, and what our dilution rate and what the sanitizer was. So that all that information gets recorded every time we do that, so we have a record of that. As I talked about already, we're making sure our equipment is washed and sanitized before harvest, so there's no risk of contamination there. And we have very, very strict hand washing and movement protocol for staff. And often you start to take this for granted, and then what happens is you bring a new staff person in or a volunteer or something, and you see that they just don't have that same sort of sense of things, and then you become much more hyper aware of it. So we're often less aware of our own hand washing until we see somebody else not meeting the standard that we're at, and then it often allows us to sort of pick up our protocol. And then, yeah, last is, as soon as we've harvested that crop, we're washing it and we're cooling it, we're packaging it and putting it in a fridge right away. And so cooling it to below 5 degrees Celsius is going to really slow down, if not stop, microbial growth. It's going to reduce any more risk of contamination at that point. And so, yeah, everything we do along the way is thinking about this. How do we, and it's not all about just avoiding contamination. These are things as well we think create a better quality product that tastes better, that stores better, that transports better. And this is something that we're offering to our customers, is something that hits all these points in terms of being a very good quality product. That was a lot. Okay, so here's a few other things to consider with just stuff in your day-to-day operations. So I mentioned this, hands must be washed from moving from one process to another. This is really crucial, especially when you're going like from outdoor to indoor, you know, washing really dirty stuff to handling a product that's going out to the customer. Hand washing becomes obsessive. I think the food peddlers spend about $1,200 a year on paper towels. You can't use reusable towels because once you've dried your hand on something once, it's essentially contaminated. So our paper towels do get recycled, but yeah, we go through a lot of them to ensure we're always using clean product to dry our hands. Hoses are a huge source of contamination. We're using a hose to water in the greenhouse, and if that hose drags along the ground and then comes up and touches the crop, it's basically the equivalent of sort of sliding that crop along the ground. So that's something I'm really, really neurotic about, is keeping hoses off the ground, especially because they kind of stretch over time, and so they kind of sag a bit down. So we have processes in place to make sure they stay way off the ground to avoid that happening. If you've got open product, and this again speaks to the importance of separating your different areas of the process, you can't be spraying water and washing something and doing something at the same time you're harvesting and packaging stuff. Those things need to remain very, very separate. So yeah, you don't want to be spraying something to clean it while actually contaminating another product that's nearby. And then a basic that people are probably familiar with is if you're home, if you're sick, stay home, or maybe you're doing a bookkeeping day or an administration day for that time that you're sick. And yeah, you need to keep a record of your sanitation tasks. So once again, this demonstrates that it was done. It gives you a log of that. It shows what you've done. And this is something that, yeah, that inspectors are definitely going to be looking for. They don't want to hear you say you've done something. They want you to show. They want you to show them, and that's what those logs do. So one way that it's really helped me with keeping on top of this is at random points in a day, I take a look around and I say to myself, what would the health inspector say right now if they saw this, this, or this? What would our customers say at the market if they saw this, this, or this? I kind of joke, what would, that obsessive uncle who's neurotic about hand washing say? What would so-and-so say? I kind of play this game because it keeps up my standard. Because in a way, sometimes I look at something and I'm not bothered about it. But when I picture someone else looking at it, it makes me go, oh, like I should deal with that. So I think that putting yourself in an outsider's view, maybe another way to look at it is what if one of my competitors was coming through our site and looking for something to use against us? What would they say? And that's one that gets me like really wanting to just really keep on top of things. So we're going to cover some more of this later. We're going to cover record keeping a bit later and sanitation for seeds later when we get into the production bit. But I hope that gives you a sense of the scope of things you need to consider to maintain a good hygienic working environment in order to maintain product integrity. That's really what it comes down to is making sure you're putting out a product that's as clean and as high quality as it can possibly be. And a big part of that is having a good hygiene and sanitation plan. And we'll talk about more of this as things go on. This is a good time for you to rest, take a nap, and try to incorporate some of that stuff into your mental consciousness. And yeah, obviously you can come back and review this stuff at any time. There are some good supporting documents for this section in your curriculum as well.